Hello there. Today I am going to be making a recipe out of the Nancy Drew Cookbook. This book was originally published in 1973, and to go along with this, I did my homework and I read The Secret of Shadow Ranch, because today I am going to be making the Shadow Ranch barbecued beans. Now, the cool thing about this book, my mom actually found a first edition of the book at a used bookstore for me. So The Secret of Shadow Ranch was published in 1930, and the book that she got me has this amazing picture in the front of one of the more exciting scenes where Nancy helps get Bess and her horse out of a flooding creek. And then I wish there was a way for me to show you this in the video, but the pages, you can feel the texturing of the stamp that put the letters onto the page. So when it was actually printing pressed, you can feel that it's pressed in and it's got nice thick pages as a result of that. So what I was going to do real quick, I was giggling as I read this book because I read these when I was in 6th grade. So I was probably 11 or 12 years old. And some of the language in this book is absolutely hilarious for a 6th grader to be reading. It's not all that strange for 1930, but for somebody in the late 1990s to be reading this, it's no wonder they called me the Human Dictionary, and it was not in an affectionate way. So just the first page starts out, "Oh, Nancy dear, do say you'll go with us to Shadow Ranch. Think of all the fun we can have on a real Western ranch." Nancy Drew, curled up like a contented kitten on the living room davenport, smiled at the earnest entreaties of her friends Elizabeth Marvin and George Fane. The two girls, both residents of River Heights, had pounced down upon Nancy only a few minutes before and were endeavoring to convince her that nothing could equal a summer vacation spent in the West. With characteristic impetuosity, they had demanded a decision before they had furnished the details of the proposed trip. A 6th grader was reading that. So as I went through this, it just got funnier and funnier, but then I kind of fell into the rhythm of it. Now, I did order a couple of other original Nancy Drew books because I had it in my head that at one point they had actually updated some of the language of these, and I'm wondering if some of it is changed to be a bit more modern, even in the original 56 books. So I'm going to look into that and see what I can find. The other thing that I wanted to find out was, did they actually make barbecued beans in the book? The answer is no. And so I did a little bit more research and I looked to see if even the Her interactive games referenced barbecued beans in any way. And the answer is no. So I think the closest that I could get to justifying this recipe was that in the Her interactive game, The Secret at Shadow Ranch, based on this book, Nancy Drew had to go pick some beans on a bit of a fetch quest. However, when she was fetching the ingredients, she brought them back to make a cake. I don't know what they did with the beans and the tomatoes that she gathered, but maybe we're using them in this? Who knows? But they did talk a lot in the book about the meals that they had there, but they didn't get into a lot of detail. They mentioned that the meals were plain but filling. So I do feel like this recipe would fit into that category of plain but filling. The seasoning primarily tends to be onion with a bit of mustard powder. There's very little even salt and pepper in there. So that makes sense to me. And I'm going to try with this cookbook to make as many of the recipes as I can. That being said, if it was published in 1970, I think some of the outlooks on cooking and flavor and the ingredients that were used is going to vary quite a bit from what we see today. Now, the version that I have is a repaired version from an old library, so it doesn't open up all the way, but I do like having the original one. But I went ahead and I ordered the updated one that was republished in, let me find this date here. So this one appears to have been republished in 2005. So it is very recent. And I do like this one because it has the spiral binding, so it makes it a lot easier to lay it flat and open in the kitchen while I am cooking. Now, one thing that I thought was really funny about this one, and it is the exact same book from one to the other, it's just a matter of the pictures look different and the binding, but the recipes I checked are all virtually identical. But in the beginning, it has an introduction that asks how you can become a really good cook. It's no mystery, Nancy Drew reveals. You must do what fine cooks have always done. Add your own special touch. I plan on taking that to the extreme with this cookbook. However, I break the rules immediately because it has cluing you in. So the first rule is to ask an adult if you can use the kitchen. As an adult, I give myself permission to use my kitchen. Check all the necessary ingredients. I'm not very good at that, but I'm practicing as I do this. Do not turn on the stove or use any sharp tool or electrical appliances without an adult present. I am an adult. We're good. However, I did have an onion chopping injury, so I still need to be careful. Unless you are an expert, follow the recipes exactly. See, now this is where you lose me, Nancy, because you just said to put my own personal touch on it. And I'm going to be honest, when it comes to this recipe, I'm going to use butter instead of margarine. Sometimes when you ask me to use canned stuff, I might use fresh because it's 2020 and canned stuff isn't always best, even though that's what my mom and my mom's mom grew up preferring. So I'm going to break that rule, and I'm probably going to break it a lot. I don't know that I would be considered an expert, maybe a home cook expert, because I do cook a lot. We'll see. Put on an apron and wash your hands before starting to work. Oh, shoot. I didn't put on an apron. I did wash my hands, though. Also, make sure to pull back long hair and roll up long sleeves before working over the stove. So, thematically, I tried to dress in my Western best with some braids and a flannel here, dressing like they would on the ranch. Rolled my sleeves up before I started cooking. Set out pot holders, utensils, and ingredients before beginning to prepare food, and use those pot holders to handle everything hot from the stove, oven, or microwave. So they did have microwaves because a lot of the instructions in this tell me to do things on the stove that I feel like we all do in the microwave, like melting butter, for example. I'm going to pay attention to that and see where they do and don't have us use the microwave as we go. So again, I'm just doing one recipe today, but I plan to do a lot more with this. So this is just kind of the preamble to all of the future recipes. Keep the handles of saucepans turned inward on the stove so they'll not be knocked over. That's good advice. Use a chopping board instead of cutting directly on a table or countertop to make sure to use different cutting boards and utensils for each raw meat or vegetable. I keep it to all the meat goes on one cutting board, all the veg goes on another. There are seriously 25 rules here. I was just going to read the one page, but this is so much. Maybe I'll do the next page with the next recipe and hope I followed the rules. I'm a decent cook. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, with that, let's go ahead and get started baking our Shadow Ranch barbecue beans. Stay tuned. So to start out with the Shadow Ranch barbecue beans, we need 2 10-ounce cans of pork and beans. Now, they don't really make 10-ounce cans anymore, so we have 2 11-ounce cans. Hopefully those extra 2 ounces aren't going to throw us off too much. I am opening them up with my manual can opener here, and I am a firm believer in having a manual can opener because if you have a power outage or some sort of emergency situation and you only have an electric can opener, how on earth are you possibly supposed to open your cans? Now, granted, I guess a lot of them have pop tops these days, so that's not as big of an issue, but much like Nancy, I do always like to be prepared. So we'll have these open and ready. I almost jumped ahead here and dumped them right in the pan, but we are not up for that just yet. So I've already preheated the oven to 300 degrees and then peeled and chopped an onion into small pieces. Now it said a large onion, so that's what I went with, but This seems to be an extremely large onion, so we're going to put it all in just to see what happens. But I get the sense that onions maybe are bigger now than they used to be, because this just seems like a lot, and I like a lot of onion. Then we melted margarine. It says to do it in a saucepan over very low heat. Instead, I took a microwave-safe dish, and I cut the 2 sticks of, now I use butter, I don't really use margarine. We know a lot more about trans fats. We know that stuff's not as good for us now. Even though butter is fatty and not great for you, I do prefer to use that over margarine. So I just cut it into small pieces and microwaved this on half power in my microwave for 2-3 minutes until it was liquid, and then I let that cool for a little bit. So I am going to grease the bottom and the sides of the baking dish that we're using right here. I have to assume they mean with the melted butter, because it doesn't specify what to use. So we're going to just dump a little bit of this in here, just a very, very little bit. And then I'm going to just kind of roll this around. All right, get out a paper towel here so I can make sure that the bottom and the sides of the dish are buttered thoroughly. We don't want any burned on beans. There we go. Set that aside. Maybe wipe the side of the dish off so it doesn't drip all over here. Okay, so after you have melted the butter, you have buttered the dish, then you are going to put the onion pieces, the melted margarine, the pork and beans, dry mustard, basically just put everything in the dish and mix it up. It's very straightforward. So we're going to start with this massive amount of onion here. Make sure you get all the little pieces here. There we go. We've got our onion. And then the melted margarine all goes in, so I didn't even need to worry about that. I feel like, do you really need to grease a dish if you're putting 2 entire sticks of butter into it? Like, is that actually a thing that needs to happen? There we go, so we've got that. And then we're adding the pork and beans here. So I've got to be honest, I have never bought this brand of pork and beans. Usually I do like the typical Bush's baked beans. So I'm looking around and the pork is kind of light in these. I'm not seeing much pork. I would prefer a little bit more. I think if I was going to make this again, I would probably buy just regular baked beans. I'm guessing that these are more of a tomatoey based, whereas I usually use barbecue based. And then I would cut up little pieces of hot dog or some other type of pork sausage to put it in there. Then we're adding, this is 1/4 cup white sugar, 3/4 cups dark brown sugar, clumps right on in there, dry mustard, so this is 1 tablespoon of dry mustard. Now we're adding a 1/4 cup of ketchup. I did some research here because it was spelled catsup, C-A-T-S-U-P, instead of the traditional ketchup with a K that we see. And in researching it, it seems that ketchup and ketchup are the same ingredient. They're just spelled differently. However, in the early 1900s, shortly before this was published, there was a difference. I think, based on what I found, that there was more vinegar and sugar added shortly before it widely became known as ketchup. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then we're going to measure out just 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce here. Now I'm going to measure over this dish, so if I overflow it, I don't put too much in the beans. Although with all of this sugar, I cannot imagine that a little extra Worcestershire would be noticed. All right, then we are literally just mixing this goo. And I'm noticing right away it's very onion and margarine heavy, butter heavy in my case. There honestly appears to be more onions than there are beans at this point, and more onions than everything else. So I'm not sure that I would be real excited if I found this on the table while I was staying at Shadow Ranch. But in that book, Nancy is able to survive in the wild on multiple occasions after getting lost. She uses a revolver, I think, to shoot a lynx and a rattlesnake, amongst other things. They outrun a cougar and rescue a child from an abusive home and find out that she was kidnapped. Spoiler, if you haven't read this 90-year-old book yet. So I'm just mixing this up until it looks like everything is pretty evenly distributed into the pan. I keep running into little chunks of brown sugar, so maybe I should have crumbled that a bit more instead of dumping the whole clump in there. But it looks pretty thoroughly mixed, so I'm pretty happy with that. Then all we're going to do is sprinkle the mixture with salt and pepper and then put this in the oven for 2 hours. So let's go ahead. I'm going to put that in the oven now, and I'll show you the finished result. And we have our beans. Now I let them cool a little bit so the pan is cool to the touch. It did say to leave them covered while they baked, and let's see what we've got here. Now I pull this off, and the first thing that I notice, these are very, very liquidy. My house has a potent aroma of onion, and as I scoop them, that butter seems to have kind of floated to the top of the beans here. So they already look a lot different than the baked beans that I'm used to out of the can. I don't know that I've ever really done that homemade before. I don't know that I would call this homemade, but I'm assuming this is this is supposed to approximate. So way, way, way too much butter here. I would use maybe a quarter the amount of butter that we've gotten these. Same with the onion. One thing I was afraid of was that the onion might not cook all the way through. It looked kind of raw when I pulled it out, but I figured 300 degrees for 2 hours. Surely that's long enough. So let's serve some of these up and see what they taste like here. They are still steaming, so they're still warm. I'll do a decent sized serving, maybe what you'd see on the side of a dish somewhere. We'll scooch this to the side. And then as recommended by the cookbook, I am serving this with applesauce. And I love my applesauce, so I've got a big helping there. I'm expecting a lot of onion flavor and a lot of kind of sweetness at the back of the mouth when I taste this. Oh, that's not as bad as I thought. Very, very sweet. I think you could probably cut the sugar in half as well, if not more. The onion is still weirdly crunchy, even though it was in there for 2 hours. Some of it, depending on how small it is a little less crunchy. The smaller bits are. But I'm thinking it may have needed to be at a higher heat. And I think I would cook it uncovered for those 2 hours. Or maybe cover it for half and then take it off halfway through. This isn't bad though. Maybe a little bit more of the dry mustard to cut through the sweetness. I can eat this though. This is good. I stand by what I said earlier though. I want more pork there. I want some sort of like a hot dog or sausage to go with this. Let's taste it with the applesauce. They do go well together. Now, the recipe also said that this could be served hot or cold. Bean down. So I want to try this. I think I'm going to refrigerate this and see if they're any better cold. Maybe that sweetness is better or more, it's not unpalatable, but more palatable if it's chilled. And I'm tempted. I feel like I should do a bite that is both applesauce and some of the beans here. Oh, no, that's interesting. That's actually not bad to mix both of them together. I think that's my favorite bite out of all of them so far. So cut back on the butter, cut back on the sugar, maybe add a little bit more of the mustard, the dry mustard. Definitely serve it with the applesauce and some sort of protein to go with it, because this definitely needs some sort of sausage or hot dog in there. But overall, this is not as bad as I had expected it to be. So we'll see what we get for leftovers. Maybe I'll do a follow-up post with what I managed to do with this massive container full of beans that I'm going to be eating by myself, and see what else we can come up with from the Nancy Drew Cookbook. So still working on the exit tagline, so I'm trying another one today. Toodaloo, Nancy Drew.